that our Farm Bill, our future. And so today we're just going to go through, and we have a couple of guests joining us to talk about different aspects of our Farm Bill. So I'm going to start with inviting Pastor Katie Kerrigan to pray for us as we begin our webinar today.
Good evening, everyone. Let's pray. God of creation, sometimes we catch glimpses of your kingdom as a great web of blessed interconnection, in which all of humanity are drawn together into relationship with one another and with you. And sometimes we catch a glimpse of your kingdom as a great web of interconnectedness of all creation in all its diversity, a great abundance of life, which we are still struggling to fully comprehend. And yet you do us the honor of asking us to participate in your sustaining of this great web of abundant life for the common good of all humanity and all creation. We do not always get it right, and so our relationships fall out of balance. And we do damage to the ties that bind us to one another and to creation. And suffering is the result. Tonight, we come together to hear how we might again partner with you in repairing the web by which you hold all together in love. Tonight, we come together in answer to your call to join with you in the restoration of the world, so that all humanity and all of creation might live abundantly, as you have always intended since you brought us into being. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for opening us in prayer. We're going to continue. I'm going to go over a little bit of what we're going to be talking about today, just to kind of give you all a heads up. So we're going to start with some welcome and introductions, then continue with an overall view of what is our Farm Bill. Then we'll continue with some issues that we are specifically looking at through Hunger Network, then continue with our Bread for the World representative. We'll continue with breakout rooms then, and how you can take action from here. So introductions, with our size, we're not going to go around the room, but if you would, please, in the Zoom comments, comment your name, where you're from, or organization you're with. That way we can all kind of get to know each other and know who all is here today. So I will start with mine. I am Jillian Russell. I am with Hunger Network in Ohio. I'm their ELCA Hunger Advocacy Fellow. And so today I am going to continue on with our webinar. So what is the Farm Bill? The Farm Bill is an ominous bill governing policy in many areas related to the agriculture sector, including farm income support, food assistance, trade, and more. This bill is renewed on a regular basis about every 5 years, and it gives policymakers an opportunity to address agricultural policy issues. In the US, we've seen it pass 18 farm bills, the most being in 2018 with our Agricultural Improvement Act. To really understand the Farm Bill and what all goes into it and how it's transformed throughout the years, I wanted to go over a brief history of the United States Farm Bill. So you can see here in 1933, it was the first Farm Bill, and it was called the Agricultural Adjustment Act, and it was a part of the New Deal. And in response to the drop in the US crop prices after the First World War, the effect of both the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl was really great on farmers and agricultural markets. And so they thought of a reason to help farmers was to use the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which created programs to reduce surplus and raise crop prices. Farmers were then eligible to receive subsidy payments in exchange for agreeing to reduce production of certain commodity crops. And the purpose of this was to achieve what is called parity, or a fair exchange value. We then continued in 1938 with a farm bill that was geared towards supporting farmers. And so this was in place of the Agricultural Act of 1933, And it continued with the Soil Conservation Act also, which was produced in 1936. And so these two laws were designed to address the ecological crisis of soil erosion that farmers were seeing during these times. So these Soil Conservation Acts established the Soil Conservation Service to produce and conduct surveys and develop preventative measures against soil erosion. From then on, we then saw our 1973 Farm Bill, which was to show the funding for farm assistance programs and was the Agricultural Consumer Protection Act. So with this, included the Food Stamp Act of 1977, which permanently amended the Food Stamp Act of 1964 with changes to their eligibility requirements. So the Food Conservation and Energy Act of 2008 was then created later and renamed to the Food Stamp Program. Also in 1973, there was an additional title of nutrition, which was considered the first omnibus farm bill. And it expanded the focus of the Farm Bill beyond just farm supports to other policy areas affecting agriculture sector. We then followed into our 1990 Farm Bill, which looked at conservation and was called the Food, Agriculture, Conservation, and Trade Act. So through this, farm bills have also addressed this conservation by including titles on climate change, renewable energy, and forestry. And the Food, Agriculture, and Conservation and Trade Act of 1990 actually included the Global Climate Change Prevention Act and was actually the first forestry title. We also saw after this, in between 1990 and 2018, it was in 2022, we had a Farm Security and Rural Investment Act, which included an energy title too. This then brings us to our most recent Farm Bill, which was the Agricultural Improvement Act of 2018. This bill included 12 different titles and makes few major changes to agricultural policy. And the most of the provisions will last until this year, 2023, when it is now time to have a new Farm Bill. So what is in the Farm Bill? So the CBO baseline here, you can see, represents budget authority and its projection of a particular point in time and what future federal spending on mandatory programs would be, assuming the current laws continue. So this also shows the benchmark against which proposed changes in law are measured. And having a baseline provides projected future funding if policymakers decide that programs are to continue. So CBO released this baseline for scoring bills during the 2023 legislative session, which was seen in May 2023. Using this projection for the major Farm Bill programs and funding indicated in law for other Farm Bill programs that are not included the annual projection. And so we see that the current baseline here is estimated to be $725 billion over 5 years and $1,463 billion over 10 years. So you can see here that nutrition is a major part of the Farm Bill. And as we started with our Farm Bill, as you saw in our history, there wasn't really a nutrition title in the very early years and was very focused on farms and farmers. But as years went by, we realized that farms and feeding people is not just about farmers and how they create their crops and different things like that, but also how can we help others who may be struggling to feed themselves with including our nutrition here. So you can see that nutrition has a majority. We are then go down to our crop insurance, our conservation commodities, and then we have our trade, our horticulture, our research, and many others, which has just a slim amount there. So the relative proportions of Farm Bill spending have shifted over time. And so in the 2023 projection, the nutrition title is 84% of the Farm Bill baseline, which compared to the 2018 Farm Bill, it was only at 76%. And in 2008, nutrition was only at 67% in the Farm Bill. We also see that there are sharp increases in our nutrition title, which reflect pandemic assistance and administrative adjustments made to SNAP benefit calculations in recent years. So what is in the nutrition title that takes up most of our Farm Bill? So you can see here on the left-hand side, it states our different things that are actually in the Farm Bill. So we have our SNAP, our Nutrition Assistance Program block grants, our Food Distribution Program on Indian reservations, our Commodity Supplemental Food Program, our nutrition incentives, and there's much more. What we don't see included, which is this is where our state offices have to pick up the pace on and kind of take over, is that it's not included in WIC. We also don't include our school meals, our summer feeding programs, our child and adult care food programs, and there's lots that is not included in the Farm Bill that you would think, because SNAP and other nutrition assistance programs are in. There's some that the state levels have to look at. So what is our reauthorization process? When I started looking into the Farm Bill, I was very confused onto what was actually even happening. You know, you hear about the Farm Bill, you think it's about just farms and farmers, but you also don't understand the magnitude of the different processes that it does go into. So I wanted to make sure that everybody kind of understood, since I didn't understand the beginning. So we see here that our House Agricultural Committee and our Senate Agriculture Committee, each committee drafts, amends, and votes on their own individual versions of their Farm Bill. From there, it then goes to our full House of Representatives and our full Senate. And each full chamber, which is considered the floor, debates, amends, and votes on the bill from its respective committee. From here, it then goes into leaders from both the House and Senate, and they form a conference committee to combine the bills that the representatives and the Senate combined and create one final bill, which then goes to the full chamber vote on the combined final bill. Once they decide on that final bill, it then gets sent to the White House for the president's signature. And so we see here, it's not just one person making the decision, but it goes from all of these multiple committees to create our one Farm Bill that we see at the end of the process. I'm now going to pass it to our Director of Hunger Network in Ohio, Deacon Nick Bates, to kind of go over what are some issues that Hunger Network is looking at in relation to our Farm Bill.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this very important conversation. And I think Jillian provided so much information and great information about the history of the Farm Bill and all of the different things that are included in it. And I think that's important for us to remember with any massive piece of public policy like this, is some of that history. To remember where the building blocks we build on. With any large piece of legislation, I think we're always going to find things that we don't always, aren't super excited about or think could do better. But we have to recognize that all of these pieces are like a big puzzle, and they come together to form our food system, not just here in America, but realistically, this piece of legislation impacts global food systems. You can go to the first slide, Jillian. And one of the things that I think as we begin the debate on this Farm Bill and really start getting in deep on it, there are two words two phrases that I think are new in our public vocabulary in a way they haven't been in a long, long time. The first is supply chain. The pandemic exposed the vulnerabilities of the global supply chain. For corporations to make things more and more efficient and more effective increases profits. But then what happens when there's contamination in a baby food factory? What happens when there's a COVID outbreak in a meat processing plant? And these sorts of things. We have to be aware, how do we develop, some say redundancies or repetition or checks within our food system to make sure that we don't disrupt the system so much, because we know who will bear the brunt of that. We know that it will be people who are already struggling to make ends meet are the ones who are going to be unable to have baby food, unable to find ground beef, unable to find chicken nuggets. at their grocery store when these disruptions happen. And we know with climate change and other things, the global supply chain will be impacted in years to come. The other term that I think we have to pay attention to is inflation. Before we jumped on tonight, I looked at Walmart's as a major grocery supply chain in the United States. Some of their profits, they had from 2020 to 2021, they saw 7.3% increase in profits, 3.5% increase in profits in 2022. And so far from January to July of 2023, Walmart has already seen their profits increase by 5.5% over the previous year. I think this is important for us to remember that as inflation while prices have been starting to stabilize somewhat, food prices are likely to remain elevated. And that's been caused by supply chain disruptions, as well as corporations' desire to keep their profit margins, let's just say very, very, very healthy. So as we look at the Farm Bill, I don't need to tell this group as I'm looking at the list of everyone who's joined. I know many of you and have interacted with you, and many of you run food pantries. Many of you volunteer at serving community meals. You all are the boots on the ground and seeing the reality of the increase in hunger throughout the state of Ohio. We know that as pandemic assistance ended last spring in many ways, and different pandemic assistance programs continue to roll off, people are struggling to make ends meet. People are struggling to afford these higher food prices. People are struggling when that expanded child tax credit went away. People are struggling with the loss of free school meals. All of these things are putting more and more pressure on families' budgets, especially their food budget. So we are seeing more children, more seniors experience hunger. One of the things that I read early on in the pandemic is that the pandemic increased a lot of economic trends by 20 years. There was already a trend of work at home and remote work, catapulted it. We saw a trend of more online shopping, catapulted it 20 years in quicker. And I think we're also seeing the rise in childcare prices, the rise, the struggles with hunger, and all of these other things that are impacting Ohio families and our neighbors each and every day, and members of our congregations. The trends just dramatically increased. One of those trends is around college student hunger. Many of our college campuses and campus ministries were already setting up food pantries on campus to help people who are hungry. And we are seeing the increase of campus food insecurity continue to increase after the pandemic. And for all of these different measurements, we also see a racial equity issue going on. College students are more likely, racial minorities are more likely to experience hunger, childhood hunger, senior citizen hunger, right down the line. So as we look at hunger from a racial equity standpoint, a gender equity standpoint, we know that we have to make sure that everybody is fed today. Too often we think that the only way to end hunger is if everyone is self-sufficient, has a good paying job. That's one way to address hunger, sure. I like that way, but it's not the only way. Children should not have to have a good paying job to have food in their bellies before they go to soccer practice. Senior citizens, we're seeing a rise in senior citizen hunger. And what I like to think about, when I think about this, I think of that 70-year-old. Because that 70-year-old has a 95-year-old mother who is struggling, that she is helping to have to provide daily care for. But that 70-year-old grandma is also responsible for getting her grandkids off the bus every day and getting them dinner, because that grandchild's parents are working multiple jobs to make ends meet. And now that grandma is giving up some of her food to make sure her grandkids are fed. And we know what that's going to do to that grandma's her health over the long term. So to address so many other issues, we have to make sure we are guaranteeing that everybody receives something that we know in the faith community pretty well, their daily bread. Go to the next slide. So as we look at the food at the Farm Bill, I think there's some key things we need to recognize. The first is we can't add additional bureaucracy. So what you'll often hear people talk about as work requirements. As I said, work provides dignity, and there's a lot of pride that people have in a good day's work. But when we're talking about work requirements for food, what we're really talking about is paperwork. It's about, will people be able to document their work hours? What happens if somebody works 50 hours this week and 20 hours the next week at the restaurant because it slows down? That's very real. What happens if you're in construction and there just aren't as many jobs because the weather's bad? So it's a paperwork issue. And as we have heard multiple proposals around increasing work requirements, there's a few things we know. One, additional work requirements do not actually create new jobs and do not actually connect people into more work. But what it does do is require social workers, instead of actually doing social work, into paperwork processors, and it moves them over there. So if I had to choose, do we spend money on putting food onto plates or putting more money into paperwork? I'm going to choose plates each and every day, because the work requirements that we already have in place aren't effective. And just adding more of an ineffective strategy is only going to increase the amount of hunger in our communities. The next thing we have to look at is the current SNAP levels. So as the pandemic ended, the pandemic increase in SNAP benefits went away. President Biden did take action to expand SNAP allotment levels to address the growing inflation and some of these other things. What we have to do is make sure that we continue to look at what does it actually cost to fill your grocery cart for a week, and base SNAP allotments on those dollars and not just artificial numbers, so that we can say, hey, look, we're doing budget deficit reduction. Because cutting food, if we have to balance our federal budget on the backs of hungry Ohioans and hungry Americans, we are balancing our budget in the wrong way. So the next thing that I want to talk about is we can't penalize people for getting an education. A lot of college students are ineligible to receive SNAP benefits. Putting them in, especially as you look at people who've returned to college and different situations. The reality is we shouldn't have the federal government trying to help families who are trying to figure out how to make ends meet, how they have to do it in this particular way. We should allow families and households the freedom to figure out what's going to work for them, for not just the short term, but the long term as well. And different educational programs are key to that. In Ohio, we have a program called Produce Perks. You can go up to a farmer's market, swipe your EBT card, and you get a little bit of extra in tokens. Go around and purchase some fresh fruits and vegetables. It's good for your local farmers. It's good to get nutrition into the homes. So we have to make sure we protect the nutrition incentive programs. And then our final point here that I want to mention is we need to make sure we're supporting small farmers. So a lot of our larger farmers are able to sell crops and their additional crops to food banks or, through the TFAT program, and that's great. We have to make sure local farmers also have the ability to get into those processes. We also, let me see, where was my number here on this? So the Urban Agricultural and Innovation Production Program, we are looking at a $50 million allocation for that. If you drive around a lot of our inner cities, you see a lot of vacant land. You see buildings that have been torn down and now just weeds are growing in those spaces. So we have to make sure we are creating credit programs and grant programs so that that land can be purchased and put to effective use in growing fruits and vegetables for that local community. Not only does this produce better quality, high quality fruits and vegetables for underserved neighborhoods where there aren't a lot of Giant Eagles and Krokers and Walmarts, but it also connects people to the source of their food. It is job training programs. I've talked to folks throughout the state who are hiring young people to learn agriculture within the city limits. That's a beautiful thing. So the federal government can invest in these programs. And then finally, around the environmental responsibility, I talked to folks in all corners of the state where the water quality is a major issue. How are we supporting farmers to make sure that they are able to keep their water clean? Because all of these issues, at the end of the day, those who have the resources will be able to find clean water. Those who are financially stable are going to be able to figure out how to get around the supply chain backups. It is those families and households and neighbors who are struggling each and every day who are going to be drinking dirty water or have to go without. Those families that are going to have access to fresh fruits and vegetables, and those families who are half cutting their milk and going, sitting, where the parent sits in the kitchen without any food while they give their last little bit of food to the kids. These stories are all too common, and our Farm Bill is one of the key pieces of legislation that we can use to address these issues in our community. So that is all I have. Jillian, are we going to do questions if anyone has any questions now, or do we want to wait till the end?
We can do questions now if you would like about Nick's presentation.
I have a question.
Yeah, hi, Gail.
Hi. Do you, Nick, do you deal with, does this Farm Bill address issues like environmental responsibility? You said environmental responsibility, but I mean, in terms of whether the farmers are using toxic pesticides, do you address that, or is that not part of it?
Yeah, so I think, Nicole, are you going to get into any of that?
I am going to talk a little bit about
Okay.
food waste in terms of environmental responsibility, but I can't really speak to pesticides specifically. I don't know if you know anything more about that or not, Nick.
So it's less about the pesticide issue. I do know Senator Brown has been encouraging a modification to crop insurance that will pay farmers to plant more cover crops that will then be able to absorb the nitrates and phosphates from getting into the water supply. So these are, fertilizers that farmers lay on their fields. For those who don't know, that end up in heavy rains, which, climate change, we're seeing heavier rains, and at different times of the year and all that are then washing these into the waterways. And then that's leading to the toxic algae blooms that we have in Northwest Ohio. So one of the things is cover crops have been a proven tool to help absorb those and keep those out of the waterways. So that's one of the things that they're looking at doing in this Farm Bill. I'm sure that there are people looking at other things around the pesticides issues and making sure that those are sustainable and not causing, long-term issues to the soil or to the end consumers. But I'm not aware of any specific proposals in this one to take a harder crack at those.
Are there any other questions for Nick at this time? Hearing none, we'll continue with our presentation from Nicole from Bread for the World.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me today. It's so great to see all of you and to just be with you. If you'll just bear with me for a moment, I'm going to share my screen. See how I can move my bar down? Like, I can't see what I'm doing here. Just trying to move into presenter mode here, but My bar is blocking my.
Not quite sure.
Let me see if I can just close it. That's strange. It was on the bottom.
Janice says click small icon on lower right-hand corner.
I'm sorry. Say that again, Nick.
The small icon in the lower right-hand corner.
Yeah, right there where it's, that'll start the slideshow. No, the move over to the left, left, right.
Oh, there
Okay,
we go.
that one.
There you go.
Okay.
Oh, that's not doing it. Okay, sorry.
That's okay. I'm going to stop sharing and see if it'll move on me. Okay. Sorry, everybody. Okay, well, we might just go this way then. Can you all see that at least?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, once again, thank you so much for having me today. And my name is Nicole Schmidt. I'm the senior organizer with Bread for the World that primarily organizes people of faith in Ohio and Michigan to reach out and build relationships with their members of Congress around hunger issues. So for those of you who are not familiar with Bread for the World, we're a Christian advocacy organization that urges U.S. decision makers to do all they can to pursue a world without hunger. So our mission is to educate and equip people to advocate for policies and programs that end hunger both in the U.S. and around the world. So we're going to talk a little bit about Bread for the World's accomplishments in 2022. And then we'll dig into the Farm Bill a little bit more and why we advocate on that. So in the United States, we all know, and as Nick said earlier, I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. I don't have to convince you that hunger is a problem, but nearly 15% of all U.S. households, that's about 40 million Americans and 12 million children, struggle to put food on the table. 1 in 5 U.S. children are at risk for hunger, and that's 1 in 3 among Black and Latino children. Majority of Americans will live in poverty at some point in their lives before the age of 65. That's 51.4% of all Americans. We know that the world produces enough food for everyone, but as many as 828 million people still go hungry in the world. After that number was steadily declining for more than a decade, world hunger is now on the rise again, and it's affecting more than 10%, or it's affecting 10% more people globally. This crisis was exacerbated by COVID-19. We know that, but continued to worsen into 2022 and 2023. In 2014, 81 million people needed life-saving humanitarian assistance, and in 2023, 340 million people do. So we're not moving in the right direction on global hunger. So why does Bread for the World advocate on the Farm Bill? I think Jillian and Nick just laid out a million reasons why we need to advocate on the Farm Bill. It affects the lives and livelihood of people all over the U.S. and in every corner of the world. This piece of legislation makes a difference for families struggling with hunger here in the U.S. and everywhere in the across the world. So the Bread for the World is calling for a farm bill that builds a healthy, equitable, and sustainable food system, both domestically and internationally. When we decided to take on the Farm Bill this year, we met with over 100 stakeholders, both farmers and most impacted communities, to find out what the most pressing issues were that were affecting communities. We spent time on tribal reservations. We spent time with Black farmers, to hear about the issues that they were struggling with. We spent time with SNAP recipients on college campuses where there's food pantries, to kind of help inform our policy platform. So some of these things Nick already touched on, that the Farm Bill is, or actually Jillian, is reauthorized every 5 years. Our current Farm Bill expires on September 30th, 2023. We do not anticipate that the language for the new Farm Bill is going to be ready by that time. So we're most likely going to be looking at some sort of continuing resolution to continue to fund things until the legislation is finished. So we'll likely be talking about this for a good part of next year as well, is what we're thinking of. Jillian, I think we duplicated each other a little bit on the Farm Bill funding slide. But here again, just the importance of nutrition in our current Farm Bill, SNAP being a large part of that projected Farm Bill funding. So when we were looking at how to build out our, gosh, it's just driving me crazy that I can't get this in full screen here. I'm sorry if this is hard for anybody to read, but we started looking at what are some improvements that we could make to the Farm Bill in the areas of nutrition? What are areas that we could improve in terms of sustainability and equity? And this particular sheet will be available to you in the follow-up materials that Jillian's going to send around. So if you're struggling to read that, don't worry. We'll make sure we get it to you. So what are our priorities? They're very close to the ones that Nick just named. I think we're in full alignment in terms of our organizations. But first and foremost, we want to see a protection of SNAP benefits. We'd like to see an expansion and improvements to accessibility in the GusNIP program, which is the Gus Schumacher Nutrition Incentive Program. And then a national standardization of food date labeling to tackle food waste and protection of the Food for Peace program. So for SNAP, we obviously support strengthening SNAP in the US and Ohio. It's our country's flagship food security and nutrition program. We know the value of this program. We know this program works. It works the way it was intended to, and it also allows people the dignity of purchasing food that is culturally appropriate, that is within their family dietary needs, or if they have food allergies. The importance of people being able to pick out their own food, I don't think I have to convince anyone of here. But in 2021, 12% of Ohio residents were helped by SNAP. We know that this program makes a huge difference to our neighbors, and we want to see that they can continue to get the assistance that they need. So our main ask for SNAP is pretty simple. That there's no additional work requirements added to SNAP and no further cuts in funding at this time. And for GusNIP, this may be less familiar to you, but Nick mentioned it earlier, the Produce Perks program is actually funded through GusNIP. So we'd like to see individuals be able to continue to access that. We'd also like to see improvements made to GusNIP so that farmers, smaller farmers, can participate by removing barriers such as like matching dollars that they need to come up with in order to participate. So we'd like to see some of those barriers removed so that smaller farmers can participate. And GusNIP also supports, if you've heard of produce prescription programs that allow healthcare providers to give low-income patients vouchers to buy produce so that they can add healthy food into their diet, that is also funded through GusNIP. So in Ohio, again, you'll know GusNIP as Produce Perks, which gives a 1-to-1 match on SNAP dollars. So families can actually take those SNAP benefits and utilize them at local farm markets to get those tokens that will help them to kind of stretch their dollars. So this is a great way to incentivize increased consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables, but it's also a great way to support local farmers and local food systems. So we're currently following 2 marker bills that are moving through the House and through the Senate, both to make improvements to the GusNIP program. So one of the things that we're asking Congress to do, or our members of Congress to do, is to co-sponsor HR 4856, or in the Senate, Senate Bill 2577. Both of these bills have been vetted by our organization, and we feel will make tremendous improvements to the GusNIP program, making it more accessible for both farmers and for our neighbors that are struggling with hunger. The other thing that we're tracking with is the Food Date Labeling Act. So we know that food date label confusion accounts for about 20% of consumer waste, which costs us about $29 million in waste every year. Standardizing and clarifying food date labels is one of the most cost-effective ways to reduce food waste nationally. And we know that this is largely good food that's getting thrown away that could be used by food banks and other charities, but also like the amount of food that families themselves are wasting just because of food date label confusion is astounding. So in Ohio, the average household throws away about 475 pounds of food waste every year. And we know that 90% of the waste that's thrown out by supermarkets in the US is food waste. This generates 26 million tons of waste every year. And if this waste were composted rather than sent to the landfill, it would reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 21.5 million metric tons. This is the equivalent of removing 4 million cars from the road, conserving 2 billion gallons of gasoline, or providing annual electricity to 2.5 million homes. So food waste may seem like an insignificant thing for us to be thinking about and to addressing, but it's a win-win in terms of feeding more people and also reducing carbon emissions. So we are tracking with another marker bill. So these marker bills are kind of setting us up to build towards the final language for the Farm Bill. So if these smaller marker bills gain traction and begin to work their way through Congress and through all of those committees that Jillian was breaking down for us, then this puts us in a stronger position when that final language for the Farm Bill comes out. So we're kind of like going at this, we're kind of like in our specific areas that we're tracking with, kind of trying to get these incremental wins so that, they add up to a much larger win in the end. So the Food Date Labeling Act is something you can talk to your member of Congress about. In the House, it's HR 3159, and in the Senate, it's Senate Bill 1484. So food for peace is another important part of the Farm Bill. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about international food assistance. So Food for Peace was established 60 years ago, and the program has reached more than 4 billion people in 150 countries with both emergency support and resilience building programs. When normal food markets fail to feed people, the Food for Peace program is what steps in. And steps in for food assistance during droughts, famines, early recovery, agricultural assistance, after war, famine, you name it, USAID does it. In 2022, USAID, the World Food Program, and various non-governmental organizations were able to deliver 97,000 metric tons of food to people in the DRC. This is the equivalent of 1.9 million bags of food. So Food for Peace is a very important part of the food bill, or the Farm Bill as well. And there's recently been some attacks that we've been tracking with that are moving through the House of Representatives. There was a bill that was introduced in June that threatens to roll back a lot of these critical policies. And it's called the American Farmers Feed the World Act. And it increases the requirement for U.S. development assistance in the form of U.S. commodities. And the reason why this is damaging is that it would really make it much harder for organizations like, say, Catholic Relief Services to implement their resilience building programs. It would leave an estimated 3 million people without assistance. And we know that the program as it currently functions is extremely efficient and returns about $3 in savings. So for every dollar that you invest in Food for Peace, more than $3 is saved in more dramatic forms of aid and assistance. So it's really quite efficient. So I'm going to give a try and see if I can share this video. I'm not sure if it'll work or not, but we'll try it. Jillian, can you tell me if you can hear the sound when I start this?
Houston, Texas.
I cannot.
You cannot. You cannot hear it, Jillian?
I cannot hear it. Sorry.
Okay. All right. That's all right. We'll just move on from that.
I think I was hearing it. It sounded quiet, so maybe I was hearing something else. But you might want to try again.
Okay. Let's just see.
Maybe not.
Okay. That's all right. That will be included in the, you can go back and watch the video. We'll include it in the slides. So what are our next steps? Jillian, do you want me to get into that now, or do you want to share it more at the end?
We can share it more at the end.
Okay, then we will do that. I will stop share. And I guess we can open it up for any questions at this time. Again, I apologize for my wonky PowerPoint situation. Any questions?
Earl, I know this is a little vague, but because you already talked about the Food for Peace.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know much about that. If there's more information that you can share about that briefly, I'd be interested just to like hear a little bit more about that, as well as the American Farmers Feed the World Act, because I just didn't know about that bill or anything. So it'd be good to hear a little bit more.
Absolutely. So let me see here. So Food for Peace, you know, when you think of like the government moving into an area after it's been war torn, like peacemaking efforts, a lot of that funding comes through Food for Peace, or when there has been a drought or a famine in an area of the world, Food for Peace is part of that USAID funded program that goes into those communities to help build resilience and to keep communities on their feet. Most of those programs are created to address acute malnutrition, so people that are really on the brink of starvation, being able to intervene with life-saving measures, high calorie, nutrient dense foods for families that are struggling. Bread for the World really is in favor of making investments both in this program, but also thinking about the way that we target our aid. So to build resilience in communities and to decrease childhood malnutrition. So we think it's really critical in the first 1,000 days of a child's life. So if you think of conception to age 2 as being that critical time period where children need the most in terms of, you know, that like they're developing rapidly at that time. So we know that that time period is really critical in a child's life. So investing in nutrition in mothers during their pregnancy and then also to age 2 is very important. So the Food for Peace program does that as well. And I actually have a 1-pager that I can send around that just gives a little bit of a deeper dive and talks about the individual countries that benefit from Food for Peace as well. So I can give that to Jillian and we can send that around. And then I also have a 1-pager on the GusNIP ask as well that kind of digs into that policy on a deeper level. And there's some links to the language that you could even get on and read like on congress.gov, like what the actual language is in that marker bill. So I'd be happy to send that around for you to do a deeper dive in, or we could even set up a call. I'd be happy to share more.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Is it Gemma? I think you're muted. Maybe I can unmute you.
Okay, I got it.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Nicole, is there any attention in the Farm Bill regarding the sourcing of USAID food? I know that some countries really are stressed by actually a dumping of cheap US food, subsidized food, which really destroys their own agricultural market. And it's a very fine balance. So is there language in the bill around that kind of issues?
Yeah, so Food for Peace has come a really long way over the years. I think one of the things that comes to mind, Gemma, when you were talking was rice in Haiti. And we know the damage that just dumping rice in Haiti did to their local economies. So we've learned a lot over the years. And that bill that I mentioned that's been moving through the House that makes changes to Food for Peace is kind of a movement of people in the House of Representatives that want to see US commodities being shipped overseas. And we've learned over the years that that's not the best thing for communities. That's not the best thing, even in terms of accessing culturally appropriate foods and foods that are familiar. There's not a lot of dignity in that. So over the years, USAID and the Food for Peace program has come a really long way. They actually have almost like debit cards that are released in times of humanitarian disasters where people can actually access like a benefit card that they can go in and use at local markets to buy culturally appropriate foods from local farmers. And so those are things we want to see continue, and we want those things to continue to be funded in their existing form. We don't want to go back to the days where we're just dumping large quantities of US, products on communities without regard for the damage that it's doing to local economies. Because at the end of the day, it feeds them temporarily, but it damages, entire communities in the process. So we strongly oppose that movement that's in the House. We were very pleased. Senator Brown was actually approached to co-sponsor the Senate version of that. And he sat down with our leaders in DC, some of our staff, and did a real deep dive on Food for Peace and was like, help me to understand why this is effective, because I can sense that this is like not the right way. you know, that, but like some of these arguments sound pretty good and convince us, you know, basically that we're on the right side of this. And our staff was able to do that with him, and he refused to co-sponsor that bill and actually cited his relationship with Bread for the World as one of the reasons why he would oppose those changes. So we were really happy to see, you know, he's been a great supporter of the anti-hunger movement. His mom was a Bread for the World activist in her church in Mansfield. So we really appreciate him very much for that. But that's a great question, and I'm glad that you brought it up.
Do we have any other questions for Nicole at this time? All right. Well, thank you so much, Nicole, for sharing all of that. And we'll continue later on some ways that we can all take action. And so we will be talking about a little bit of how H&O has some actions that we can do, and also Bread for the World. We're going to now continue to our breakout rooms. Our breakout room questions I'm going to put here in the chat, and then I will also re-put them in once you get into your rooms. So our first is that you're going to just introduce yourself to one another. After that, then our first question is, how has hunger changed in your community since the pandemic? And our second question is, what would improve food production in your community? We'll be in our breakout rooms for probably around 7 to 10 minutes and kind of discuss amongst each other these questions, but also go into more specifics questions, ponder different things about your community and about the Farm Bill in general. And we'll come back and we'll have some open Q&A for to get some more of our questions answered.
If you're used to breakout rooms on Zoom, I always take it as a great sign that, you know, when I hit the close room button, it gives you that 120-second countdown. Nobody was jumping over to get back to the main session. So there must have been some good conversations going on, which I always appreciate.
We had a guy in Fremont, Ohio, who was mid-sentence when it got down to 1 second and he disappeared, at least to me.
Well, thank you all so much for being so willing and to answer our questions, to have those discussions. Before we continue on later to have some more discussion and answer some of your questions from our presenters, I want to go through some ways that you all can take action, both from the Hunger Network perspective, and then we'll have Nicole also. So I'm going to share my screen here. So how can you play a part in the next Farm Bill? So one way is that you can call the Capitol switchboard, which I have the number here, and also all of these resources I will be putting into the email that I send out within the next day. So you can call the Capitol switchboard and leave a message for your specific senators and representatives. And here I put a kind of a short little way that you can, how you can speak with them or even send an email with the same kinds of things. So by calling them and leaving those messages, that really grabs their attention to really notice that, hey, I have a lot of people calling me today to tell me about this specific thing. And it just shows that people are concerned about it and like, maybe I should pay more attention to it. You can also write a letter. Like I said, you can use that little blurb that I had in the last one that I'll send out later as an email. But we also have some sample letters for our different things about the Farm Bill. For example, in this one, it's our sample letter for hunger. I'll send our resource page out here in a short bit that has all of these, along with different ways that you can insert your own perspectives and your own desires for the Farm Bill. You can also just generally get informed. So we have compiled a big list of different ways that you can, one, take action, but also just to have more information and to get more used to what's happening in the Farm Bill. And I'll put it here in our chat in a second, our link to our resource page, where you can find most of the resources that we've talked about today with Hunger Network in Ohio, and we'll continue to add those, but also different denominational resources, different organization resources that can send you even farther than what we've explained today. We're now going to talk with Nicole with how Bread for the World says you should take some action.
Great. Thanks so much. So first of all, I want to say I affirm every single thing that Jillian just said. Those are all great ways to take action, and I'm going to direct you in similar ways. So I'd love to invite you. We have just a regional network of people that are working on federal hunger issues with Bread for the World that are from Ohio and Michigan and the rest of the Midwest. So we have a regional meeting that's coming up on October 25th, and that's at 1 p.m. So if you want to join us over your lunch break, and I'll put the link in the chat to that. You can just click on that link and actually register for that meeting. And secondly, you know, I would love for you to write letters as individuals, like Jillian said, but Bread for the World works with congregations all over the nation to organize what we call an offering of letters campaign. So if you're familiar with Bread for the World, you've probably heard of the offering of letters, but we'd like to invite you to write letters as a faith community, or if you have like a club, or, you know, it doesn't have to be a faith community, but we primarily have our offerings of letters in churches or with small groups. And we'd just like to invite you to write those letters together and to write them to both your senators and your House member, so whoever your member of Congress is. And if you visit bread.org/OL, that's for offering of letters, and I'll put that in the chat as well. We have a whole page of resources that help you to do that in community in your congregations. So we have printable one-pagers on all the things we talked about on this call. We also have printable links to our Farm Bill policy platform, so you can dig a little deeper in your community and educate those around you. And then we also have things like bulletin links and posters that are printable. So we make it really easy. It's kind of a one-stop shop for you to be able to take action in your community. So I'm going to put that in the chat as well. and I invite you to check that out and to be in touch with me. I would love to visit your church or your community. If you're new to this and you're feeling a little hesitant about organizing in your local context, I would be happy to visit and to share more in your congregations. And I think that's all I got.
Great, thank you. At this time, we're going to kind of open the floor for any discussion or questions that you all may would like to have within this community, within our speakers today. Are there any questions that would like to be brought up today? If not, I will continue.
I had one quick thing, Jillian, just to say, I would like to thank Nicole for joining this conversation today. As many of you know, when it comes to things like state budget policy, school funding, those sorts of things, I have quite a bit of policy expertise. But when it comes to a lot of federal things, specifically around the Farm Bill, one of the first places I'll be going is often to Bread for the World's resources. So wealth of information, strongly encourage you to look at their, because they really have a lot of expertise on the federal level. That it's great to be able to be, we're the Hunger Network for a reason. We love partnering and collaborating. So thank you so much, Nicole, for being with us today.
This is Yale Lowe. I just wanted to add a couple things. I noticed when you're talking about letters, I just wanted to point out that it's really better if you do email letters, because there's still restrictions of actual mail coming in that they get set aside for like up to a week or two to be checked into, looking still for like ricin or things like that. So sending an actual letter isn't as helpful as doing email that they're going to get it right away. And then I just wanted to encourage people to especially focus on Senator Vance, because Senator Brown really is on our side, as you were talking about. And so it's really Senator Vance, especially from areas like Fremont or other, small communities that need to hear, that he needs to hear from, that it's, because I think he's used to the idea that the big centers of Ohio are going to be talking this way, but that he needs to hear from other smaller areas of Ohio, that they really care about national things to help the poor and those that are struggling. So I would love to encourage people to especially focus on getting the word out to Vance and doing it in emails is my take on this. Thanks.
That's really helpful, Gail. I would just add, so I think if you're familiar with Bread for the World, you know that our jam is like, we love handwritten letters. But we're moving into a new time and email is great as well. But the one thing we always say is personalize those letters, because offices do tend to write off what they deem as like a form letter. If they're getting hundreds of the same exact thing that's not personalized, the subject line's not changed, as much as you can personalize those letters, the better.
Right. Share your own story, or share things
Absolutely.
that are specifically about your area, for example. But yeah, that's, I just, like I say, the handwritten letter is lovely, but it may not get to them until kind of later than what you really want. The
Yep.
other question I had, I noticed I couldn't focus on it real well, but the thing that you were having about call in and talk to, Senator Vance or whatever, and I thought it was saying about support a farm, and I thought you were maybe needing to say support the farm bill. I wasn't real clear on that, but if you would look at that again, just to make sure that that's what you wanted to say, was support a farm instead of support the farm bill in its, in its updated version or whatever. I thought that was maybe a little throwing me off. So that's my other suggestion.
Yeah, one of the things that the history of the Farm Bill shows us is that the strength of the Farm Bill in getting passed and protecting the nutrition title and all that is the fact that it draws together both rural and urban, north and south, east and west, different interests. So the more that we can tie together addressing nutritional issues is good for, Ohio farmers is also, yeah, definitely personalize those phone calls. The more you can, tell your own story and that, but, and look for ways to be like, we have hunger, so often people think hunger is just a big city issue. But we know that it's in all 88 counties in the state and in all 50 states in the union, as well as Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. and indigenous, Native American reservations, and in all of our territories.
Well, and I was at a meeting with one of the friends that's on this as well, that I thought she was probably going to bring up, but there's actually like a charter school, or it's a magnet school, I guess, in the Columbus area, that actually the teachers have gotten together and they put together like bags of food for the weekends, because the kids are getting, like breakfast and lunch at least at school during the week, but there's no food at home on the weekends for some of these households. And so that was another concern that we had, about, that we do need to keep encouraging SNAP and, the Farm Bill to be able to still be providing as much food as we can.
Looks like Anne had a question.
Yes, I have a question. Thank you. I also want to comment on, I agree with whoever spoke about focusing on Senator Vance. And if any of you read his book, he can get really off on people who don't work. And I think it's really important to point out to him how many working families need to rely on SNAP. And that's because of low wages and the cost of childcare and so on, and that it's not worth the extra money to spend on the bureaucracy to try to catch a few cheaters. That's true everywhere, especially with paying taxes, which of course addresses more of his echelon of income. Well, maybe we shouldn't make that too obvious, but still, we don't want to waste money, government money, on trying to find a few cheaters and putting everybody through more hardship in order to obtain their resources because of the bureaucracy. But any examples you have of working families that really rely on the food stamps would be really good examples. And the other thing I wanted to mention was there was a little attention to climate change as a factor in a lot of the problems that we're seeing. And there are some other parts of the Farm Bill. I haven't studied the other parts yet. I've just heard a little bit about them that could have more of an impact on climate change. And of course, climate change is going to affect food production as well as supply chains. So anything we can do to fight climate change will also help the food supply. And I've heard that there are some things being talked about for the bill that would promote more regenerative agriculture, which uses less fertilizer and protects the soil more. And the soil not only needs protection in order to continue to be productive, but also the soil sequesters carbon. So the traditional means of farming have not really protected the soil, and they certainly haven't helped at all with climate change. So I think there's some funding that people are talking about in that bill that would promote more of what they call regenerative farming. Just something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, great point, Sam. And this is one of the things where Nicole mentioned the different marker bills. And I know and I don't know the numbers offhand, or, when it comes to a lot of environmental stuff, I'm, asking other people all the time to make me smarter. But yeah, I know there are people looking at those different things, and, a lot of it's gonna be, grant programs, that have like specific funding levels. So one of the big things is, can we increase funding levels for that? And the Inflation Reduction Act that passed, what, a year and a half ago at this point, whenever it passed, it actually built on a lot of Farm Bill environmental programs with additional funding, that a lot of people in agriculture were really excited about, so that they could begin to expand a lot of good programs that they were, building up. But the funding levels, people look at the Inflation Reduction Act and say, it was the largest environmental bill this country has ever passed. Yeah, and that's pretty sad in my mind.
Right.
that was the biggest. Yes, it was, but it's still just a drop in the bucket of what we need to be doing.
We need. Yep. Thank you.
Kit.
I have a question.
This is Kit Logston from Columbus. First of all, I wish that I could have a rerun of everything that Anne said, because she made so many important points. And then also to reiterate what Gail Lowe had indicated, the weekend take-home bags that are being given to local school is in a neighborhood in Clintonville that has been doing this. And it seems like an excellent idea for us to adopt our local schools to do weekend take-home bags, especially where you have low-income children who may not eat over the weekend. That's all.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions? All right. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for joining us once again. This was just a great conversation and great opportunity to really engage with all aspects of our community. Once again, we will be sending out the recording along with all the other resources in an email in the next day or so. So look out for those. And I included our emails here on the screen. So if you have any questions, want to continue the conversations, want to meet, have discussion, please reach out to any of us. You can also find more of events like this and our upcoming ones, or stay up to date with what Hunger Network is doing by looking at our Facebook and on our website. I am going to ask Caroline Guy if they would like to close us in prayer.
Absolutely. And just one more quick shout out to Jillian and to Nick and Nicole. Thank you for your dedicated work and for taking time to educate and inform us on how we can join you in that work. So I invite you to join me in prayer. Gracious and living God, we thank you for our ancestors, for their wisdom and knowledge to know the land. We give you thanks for all of creation, and we know that you have given us charge to be stewards of air, land, water, and all living things. We thank you for those who grow food and who farm. We thank you for those who labor in the fields. We thank you for those who bring crops to market. We thank you for merchants who give us access to your bounty. We thank you for the hands that make and prepare our daily bread. We give you thanks for those who advocate so that all of your children receive everything they need and more. Give us nourishment to do your work in the world, that fed we can feed others. Give us the strength and courage we need to work for justice and equity for all. May our work and faith in you create that heavenly community where all are fed. And may your will be done. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all for joining, and we hope you have a great rest of your week and rest of your night.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.